Today I thought I'd sit down and talk about something that I really enjoy working with and something that you've probably come across, or maybe if you're new to tools, something that you will definitely come across. That is ratchets and sockets, or I guess socket wrenches and the accompanying sockets. So we're just going to go through a whole bunch of different things about these tools, some things to know, things to consider, maybe when buying some or even just using them. And if you have any questions or comments that you can provide to this video, I definitely welcome you to put those in the comment section below. I think that's where we learn best, is from this community. So without further ado, let's get started. So, ratchets. I don't think there's anything more enjoyable than hearing the sound of the ratcheting mechanism, but essentially these tools are pivotal whether it comes to working on your vehicle, small jobs around the house, other repair maintenance, because we come across so many bolts and nuts in the things that we work on, the things, whether it's furniture, whether it's cars, boats, even some plumbing and other things. These mechanical fasteners are ubiquitous. So these ratchets are essential for helping us connect and tighten and make these connections. Now, as you know, this is kind of what a ratchet looks like, but there's actually a whole lot more to ratchets than just kind of this stereotypical picture. So the first thing we need to consider is the different types of ratchets out there. And there's a whole host of them, but we're going to go through a couple essential differences to get started. So here, as you can see, I have 3 different ratchets. And yes, they all differ in look, but there's also something very important about the difference between them. And of course, the difference not only being their length, but in the box end of each of these. As you can tell, they're each 3 different sizes. And the drive size that you would measure here is basically the name of this ratchet. So we'll start out with this one first, get our little trusty tape measure, put it on the box end of the ratchet, try and straighten it out a bit. And this one might not come across too easily, but as you can see, this measures a 1/4 inch. So this is a 1/4 inch ratchet this one's made by DeWalt. The next one here, a little bit bigger, put our tape measure on the anvil, and we see this is 3/8 of an inch. And then moving to the last one here, we see that this is 1/2 an inch. So each of these socket wrenches are known and distinguished by their drive. So the size of these box ends. So this is your 1/4 inch ratchet, your 3/8 inch ratchet, and your 1/2 inch ratchet. Now there's actually more than just these 3. There's also bigger ones. So there'd be next a 3/4 inch ratchet, an inch ratchet, and I think it actually goes even beyond that. Now those larger sizes are used more for like heavy duty equipment maintenance. So honestly, what you're going to be mostly working with, if you're just a professional homeowner, are these 3. And honestly, I would say the 3/8 ratchet, if you don't have a ratchet yet, is your first go-to, because it's in the middle of the spectrum in terms of, small anvil versus a larger anvil. So a lot of sockets will go on here. You can usually get some pretty small size sockets on here, and you can work your way up pretty big. Now, as you can imagine, the whole point of having different sizes is because not only the convenience of space, because sometimes what you might be working in might not allow for something this long and might require you to have something this short. Whereas other times, a small ratchet like this might not have the leverage or the rotational force to actually get something off, which is why you might need something bigger like this. And as you can obviously imagine, the thicker these anvils are, the more strength that they'll have. So you wouldn't want to put on the largest socket in the world on this poor little ratchet, because this would not, A, it would not provide enough leverage, and B, the anvil would easily break off. So there is some consideration in terms of what sockets work with which ratchets. Obviously, if you can get the socket on there, it will work, but there is kind of a good range of socket sizes. So like, for example, for the 1/4 inch ratchet, most of the sockets you will see that go with a 1/4 inch ratchet would be things anywhere from as small as like 4 millimeters up to maybe 14 millimeters. You wouldn't see a 27 millimeter socket, which would be very huge, made with a 1/4 inch drive end. So that's just something to consider. Is, you know, there are different ones you can get. I personally would recommend at least starting here, and then of course as you get into bigger and badder things, maybe getting a 1/2 inch drive, and obviously a smaller one does come in handy if you've seen my videos. So that's the kind of short and skinny when it comes to the ratchets. Another important thing, obviously besides the drive size of those box ends, is the different types. So as you can see here, these are somewhat synonymous in terms of just having a straight profile, nothing too fancy. This one is a little offset, as you can see here. You can see here where the ratchet head is versus the handle. It's actually offset a little bit, which is nice, because sometimes, let's say you're trying to loosen a bolt, you might need to have that extra clearance underneath here to maybe have your fingers underneath so you're not whacking your hand each time you're moving that ratchet. Compared to this one, where if you're working on something, your hand needs to be parallel, or yeah, it needs to run parallel basically to what you're working on. So that's one distinguishing feature, is a lot of ratchets are just straight like this, but you can also get ones that are offset. In addition to that, there's also a great invention called Comfort Grip. Obviously in the winter months, these can get very cold and kind of rough on your hands. Sometimes people actually prefer not having the Comfort Grip, but that's a nice feature about some ratchets, is they actually have a nice plastic on the bottom so that A, these ratchets aren't cold, and B, sometimes it helps, you know, with the ergonomics when it fits in your hand. In addition to Comfort Grip, there's also different ratchets like this that have flexing heads. So instead of being all straight like this, let's say you needed to get a bolt that was maybe offset like this, and maybe based on the other things that were in your way, you couldn't get a wrench or a socket wrench on there straight. With this ratchet, you could actually push the handle back and go to work like this with, you know, stuff being in your way here. So that's another nice thing. And honestly, I would say the more specialty ratchets like this with like flex heads or other kind of very specific things might be more necessary when working on cars, since there's different clearances that you'll have. But again, those options are available to you. So we have Comfort Grip, we have flexible heads. Obviously we have larger lengths. So here I have a very long 1/2 inch drive ratchet. Even though this ratchet is also a 1/2 inch drive, I'm going to put them head to head here. You can see that this ratchet, this second ratchet here, actually provides more leverage. And we can even measure that and see that there's almost 5 extra inches of leverage. So this ratchet, even though they're both 1/2 inch drive, this one would actually provide more leverage because it's longer. So that's the thing. There's a lot of variables to consider, but honestly, I would say, getting down to brass tacks, when you're getting started, start with a 3/8 inch drive socket wrench, and, you know, get something that you like, that's comfortable. You know, you can get something that's straight, or if you want something offset, that's fine. But obviously the more features like having a flexible head, Comfort Grip, and all those things might start to drive up the price a bit. So just consider that. But that essentially is some of the basics. Also, another fun fact here, this is known as a pear head ratchet. As you can see, a lot of ratchets kind of look like this, where they're
oval shaped.
And then this one's more shaped like a pear, kind of help with clearance. So again, there's a whole host of different variables. But that, I think, covers the general aspects of ratchets. So we talked about the different drive sizes that you can get. Now let's actually get into sockets. So let's get a couple of these out of the way. And obviously, when I'm going to be using this ratchet for most of my examples, since it's smaller and it fits in the field of view here. But this will obviously apply to any of the other ratchets that we've talked about, or any that you see. So again, let's go back to our example that, let's say maybe you're attaching legs to a piece of furniture, maybe to a table, and you are putting the legs on and you just have to tighten this bolt to the threads here that are underneath the table. So you could use a wrench like this, but again, a wrench is nice because with that ratcheting mechanism, you can move a socket and move a bolt without much clearance. So let me show you here. So again, we have a 3/8 inch drive. So where this becomes important is when we actually get our sockets. So I'm gonna get a couple sockets here for this example. So here are 3 of the same sockets. Now they don't look the same, but I promise you are the same in essence because these are all 13mm sockets. Let me see one that you can see most clearly on. So you can see here, 13, here, 13, and here, this one's a little bit harder to make out, but that also says 13. So you have 3 13mm sockets here, but besides some length differences, if we flip them upside down, right, because this is where the bolt would go. So as you can see here, 13, that fits great, 13, that fits, 13, that fits. So you have 3 13mm sockets. Besides some immediate physical differences in terms of length, if we flip them upside down where they would actually connect into the ratchet, we can see there are our box end for the ratchet, but there's 3 different sizes. So obviously we have the 1/2 inch here, the 3/8, and then the 1/4 inch. So because this is a 3/8 inch ratchet, we have our 1/4 inch. No matter what we do, that will not go on. We get our 3/8, slips right on. 1/2 inch, too big, it can just slip off. So each of these would have their corresponding, so we have our 1/4 to 1/4, 1/4 to 1/4, 3/8 to 3/8, and 1/2 inch to 1/2 inch. So that's the difference. One of the differences between these sockets is which box end ratchet they would fit. So the 1/2 inch, the 1/2 inch, 3/8, 3/8, and the 1/4 inch, the 1/4 inch. Now, you can still have them go on the other sockets, which I'll get to in a moment here. But for this example, I just want you to get the fact that, right, even though we have 3 different sockets in physical appearance and even drive size, they're all still 13mm sockets. If you were, let's say this was the bolt that you were attaching to your table, whether you had the 1/2 inch, the 3/8, or the 1/4 inch, these all 3 would do the same exact job. It would just affect which ratchet you could use to some extent, and we'll get there in a second. So with that, let's go back to our 3/8. So we have these 2 other sockets, 13mm, but the one that fits perfectly is this 13mm 3/8 drive. So a lot of ratchets will have this button on the back, and what you can see here, this little pawl, when you push that button in, that pushes down that little ball so that you can slide on the socket, and then once you release it, that keeps the socket from falling off. Some older style socket wrenches don't have that. The sockets would just fall off, which is why they kind of invented or added this locking feature so that you don't have to worry about, maybe if you're working like this, your socket sliding off. So that's that quick release right there, which is common on some, like this one you can see here has a quick release, but then this older style Mac ratchet does not have a quick release. So you just push it down, and there is a ball detent, but when you try and pull it off, it's actually a lot harder to pull off since there isn't that feature. So like here, push, release easily, and then you can see it doesn't come off, falls off easily. So here, again, we're working on our table, we're using our socket wrench, we're tightening, blah, 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 blah. Now, on the back of your ratchet, there's this little lever, and this moves it from either tightening or loosening. And sometimes you'd think that this would be universal, but honestly, Most are the same except for I've noticed Harbor Freight ratchets, which this one is here, actually is reversed. So it might take some time. Honestly, I would get the same brand ratchets so at least you get familiar and aren't getting annoyed when one ratchet is directional and the other one is the opposite direction. But basically, one direction is tightening and the other is loosening. So that's what that paddle switch does on the back. That's how you would either move down the threads or move up the threads if you were loosening the bolt. So maybe before I forget, I'm just going to quickly talk about, well, why not just invest in wrenches? Well, as you can see, right, these do have similar rules. This is also a 13 millimeter wrench. This would work on our 13 millimeter bolt here. So let's say, hey, why not just use this or the box end instead of paying money for a different tool? Well, that is true that wrenches definitely are very useful, but the only downside is every time let's say you only had a small amount of room and you tightened, you'd have to take this off, come back, tighten, come back, take off, tighten, and it would take you hours and hours just to tighten this silly bolt. But that's the nice thing about the ratchet is it also works like a wrench, hence why it's called a socket wrench, in that it can keep the socket on there and that you just move the actual ratchet to twist the box end of the ratchet and therefore twist the socket. So you can go back and forth without having to take off, come back, take off, because again, that would take forever. So that's where a ratchet is superior to a wrench. Now, sometimes you might not even have enough clearance to get a wrench or a socket wrench on there. So you'll need to use a wrench. Maybe there's a lot of other stuff in the way, and I mean, look how thin this is compared to this whole mechanism. So don't think that this one replaces the other, because even though they serve similar purposes, they definitely have overlapping and dissimilar functions. So just wanted to talk about that both are definitely useful, both can be used to tackle a lot of the same things, but I would definitely recommend both. So again, we've talked about these different sockets, and interestingly enough, you can actually use the 1/2 inch or the 3/8 or the 1/4 inch on this 3/8 ratchet or any other combination with any other drive ratchet with these cool things called adapters. So what they do is, as you can see here, it almost looks like a socket. So the bottom end is 3/8, so we could put that on our ratchet. But now we've also, this is not a socket, right? It's an adapter. So this end now is 1/4 inch drive. So now we can put our 1/4 inch drive onto this 1/4 inch adapter. It might take a little bit of pushing. And there we go. So now we're still using our 13 millimeter socket. However, it's actually a 1/4 inch drive, 13 millimeter socket. So that's where things really get cool, is you don't have to, let's say you sometimes, like me, find a socket on the side of the road and maybe you only have a 3/8 drive ratchet and you find a 1/4 inch drive. Well, don't throw it out. A, because tools are awesome, but also B, because you can actually get these adapters so you can use it on a 3/8 drive, even if it's maybe a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch. So this is the reducer adapter. So this goes from 3/8 to 1/4 inch. Let's try something else. So this one here actually goes from 3/8, and it actually shows you here, 3/8 to 1/2 inch. So we could put it on our 3/8, and then we can get our 1/2 inch drive socket. And now look at that. Now we can use our 1/2 inch drive 13 millimeter on our 3/8 ratchet. So of course there's all sorts of combinations, right? So this is 3/8 to 1/4. This is 3/8 to 1/2. So we're going down here, we're stepping up here. This one goes from 1/2 to 3/8. So if we get our 1/2 inch here, put this on, we can use our 3/8 drive. We can take that off, we can use our 1/2 inch drive. So it's a cool way to kind of, find different ways to make your tools work. And actually, before we get into that, so those are those adapters that you can use to make different sockets work. Now, a quick note here, just because these exist does not mean that you can do anything you want with it. And what I mean by that is, let's say, right, we have this 3/8, I want to try a different example here. let's say we go to this 3/8 to this 1/2 inch. Now, there's a lot of 1/2 inch drive sockets that are really big. They can go up to 30, 32. I mean, these are, we're talking like huge sockets. And this little ratchet, even though you put on the adapter there, might not be able to really do the job of a 1/2 inch drive ratchet. So essentially, just because you can put an adapter on does not mean that it has the strength or the leverage of the corresponding ratchet. So for example, right now I've made this a 1/2 inch drive ratchet. That does not mean it is the same thing as this 1/2 inch drive ratchet. So just consider that. And a prime example is one time I had to get a bolt off of a lawnmower, and I didn't have the right drive socket. I think it was a 16 millimeter socket, and I had a 16 millimeter 1/4 inch, so I didn't have a 3/8. So what I did is I said, okay, let me use my adapter. I'll put on the 16 millimeter 1/4. That'll work great. And I started using it on my 3/8 or my my 3/8 ratchet, and I was really hammering on this thing because it was tight on there, and it just completely broke the top portion of this. So keep in mind that although these adapters do exist, again, you cannot just make any combination work. The size ratchet kind of limits the size socket you can put on there. And obviously people, can put bigger sockets or smaller sockets and do stuff like that all the time. But just know that there are limits, and you will break these adapters if you put too much if you torture them too much. So those are adapters. So again, that kind of makes it so that you can cross socket drives between socket wrenches. All right, so we've talked about that. The next thing I want to talk about is something more in addition to what we've talked about, if you're not already confused. So these sockets are generally known as shallow sockets. Even though, yeah, this one's a little bit bigger, they're all kind of on the shorter spectrum here. So let's say, what if this bolt was all the way down the threads here, holding something down, and I needed to use my 13 millimeter socket to get on there? Well, okay, put the socket wrench on there. And now look at this problem. The socket is not deep enough to actually reach the walls of that bolt. So that's why they invented these deep sockets. So again, this is 13 millimeter, 3/8 inch drive. And now look, I guess I should show you here. Let's put it on the socket. Now we can actually reach that bolt head, or excuse me, that nut. So to make it more straightforward here, so here we have our shallows, and now here are the accompanying deep sockets for each drive. Again, 1/2 inch, 13 millimeter, 3/8, 13, and then a 1/4 inch 13. So now, when it comes to getting a nut or a bolt that's maybe further down than these shallow ones can meet, you can get these deep sockets. Again, same size, same everything we've talked about, they're just deeper. And if that's not confusing enough, there's actually sockets in between these called semi-deep sockets, because sometimes this is too deep for a socket, sometimes this is too shallow, so you need something maybe in the middle to help you reach that nut or bolt. And I don't own any because honestly I would say the shallow and deep are the most common, the most you'll ever need. But if you start working on cars or things with tight spaces, you realize that these small and big sizes sometimes are either too big or too small to get the job done. So yeah, a lot of good stuff when it comes to sockets to consider. I guess to recap here, since we've kind of talked about a lot, is again, starting with a 3/8 inch drive ratchet is definitely a strong suggestion. And when it comes to getting sockets, I would definitely invest in a set of deep and shallow, because sometimes you'll have easy things that maybe aren't too far down that you can use your shallow socket on. And sometimes you'll have other bolts and nuts that are very difficult to reach, and you'll need to use a deep socket.
In addition to deep and shallow sockets, something else I wanted to mention that I didn't give enough attention to in this video is the need for both metric sockets, like I've already mentioned, as well as SAE or standard sockets. Sets are both used, whether it's on cars, equipment, or other things, so I would highly suggest investing in both.
Let's see here. And as you might have noticed, all of these sockets here that we've talked about are hex head. So as you can see, there's 6 sides, and I'll use this 1/2" drive here because it's easy to see, right? We have 6 sides, which makes it so that you can turn the bolt, a 6-sided bolt, no problem. But let's say, again, using the car analogy here, where it's a very tight space, what if we can't get our socket on? What if we need something that has a little bit more give to it? Well, move these down here. So here, again, this is one of our deep sockets, so that is synonymous. This is going to be a 3/8 drive, judging by the box end here. But now let's talk about this. Now this is not something we've seen before. This is a 12-point socket. If you counted all the little points here, there'd be 12. And these do work on these 6-sided bolts. The nice thing about it is you can see here, hopefully. Actually, this one I might have gotten. Oh, I got a 14, so this is a little bit too big. Let me grab this is a 13. So, right, we have our 13. This is a 3/8 shallow. So again, we can grab the socket, no problem. But now we can actually get the socket with less of a rotation in case we needed to move the socket than we would with the 12-point. Because as you can see with the 12-point, right, there's only 6 ways you can put this nut in. This way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. Whereas this one, we have 12, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So that's the nice thing is these 12-point sockets, which to be completely honest with you, I don't use as much. These come in handy too in case you don't have a lot of space to turn your ratchet. This will actually give you more opportunities to grab onto this bolt. The only bad part is because obviously there's less contact with the head of this bolt. 12-point sockets like this are notorious for rounding bolts to some extent. Now, I mean, if you're pushing with all of your force onto something, you'll likely round it off. But honestly, if I can't find a socket, I've used 12-point sockets to loosen something and it hasn't rounded it out. It's only if you put a lot of force, because as you can see, there's not as much contact area as this one. So don't get too confused. This is, the same sort of stuff. It's just know that there's 6-point sockets, very common. There's also 12-point, which people do have. And honestly, the only benefit to this is that they do provide more ability to grab things. All right, so now we've talked about sockets in general, and these are called chrome sockets based on their chrome plating. We talked about socket wrenches or ratchets, whatever you want to call it. Now, sometimes it's really easy to get the bolt on. Let's say, again, going to the table analogy, it might be really easy to get your socket on there and pull it off. But sometimes this bolt might be buried way up somewhere where even this deep socket might not be long enough. So what do you do in those situations? Well, there are things called extensions that you can buy that can help extend, right, your ratchet so that you can reach this bolt. So let's say, right, I'm working in my car. I got to get this bolt out. How do I get this socket that I can't move my wrench anymore because maybe there's a hole, right, there's the engine or something right here that prohibits me. I can't throw in a deep socket because that still won't get me. How do I get from point A here to point B? Well, this is where these extensions come in. So literally, you just match the drive size. So this is a 3/8 drive. And now we put that onto our ratchet and look at that. Now, same thing, we can ratchet away at this bolt. And for the most part, the extensions are this consistent, right? So we'd have 3/8 on this end, 3/8 on that end. Now they can work like the adapters here that I mentioned and be longer. So let's say this one is the same. But let's just say for an example, this one was 1/2 inch here and 3/8 down here. So you can have reducing extensions that change drive size across and also extend. So biggest point here with the extensions is 2 things. One, You can get them in different sizes. So usually you can get them as short as, I think, like an inch to like 2 inches or 3 inches up to 6 inches. I have even some that are 2 feet. So it's nice to have a whole set of these because sometimes whatever you're working in, like my video that I did on changing the spark plugs in my Jeep, I needed multiple extensions to get down to the spark plugs. So that's a nice thing too, is stock up on adapters because you just never know what combination, whether it's, you know, having to use a 3/8 to a reducer here to you know, an extension like this will get you through the job that you need to get done. So that's the cool thing, is I feel like these are almost like Legos. You can mix and match and make things work to the job that you're working on. This one actually is a reducing one, actually, I should mention. So this is 3/8 here, and it goes to 1/4 inch on the end. But regardless, these are extensions. They can either stay the same drive from start to finish, or they can reduce from start to finish. So definitely helpful to invest in those. And another cool one that I honestly don't use that much because it's kind of gimmicky, but it does work, is one of these flexible ones. Again, the more you work with stuff, you'll realize that sometimes you can't always get to things straight on. So this is kind of cool in that it allows you to put on again, we have 1/4 inch drive at the end. And then we can put it on our ratchet. So cool thing like that. Alrighty, now we're going to get a little bit deeper into sockets here for a moment, because sometimes with especially Asian cars and German cars, you don't always see hex-headed bolts. Sometimes you have weird funky looking bolts that are shaped like stars. Sometimes they're shaped, maybe they're like the inverted version of this, and that's where things called specialty sockets come. Now before you get too overwhelmed by, you know, a different looking socket, again, all the general principles apply. Drive style, so these are all 3/8, so these would all go into a 3/8 ratchet. It's just the type of bolts these would go to. So this is called a triple square. This would go to a M10 triple square bolt. This is a T30 Torx, so a Torx bolt. If you saw my stealth repair video on the leaf blower, I used one of these. And this is a hex head bolt that you can use. I think I used one of these on replacing the rear differential fluid on my Jeep. So just know that not everything is hex head anymore. Sometimes it's the inverted hex like this, where you actually have a hex headed bolt. Sometimes it's Torx. Sometimes it's a triple square. There's inverted Torx. There's a whole host of different types of sockets. But again, getting back to it, these are going to be your bread and butter. These hex head sockets are going to be most of what you use around the house or on your car. But depending on, you know, if you're going to use it more for vehicles, you are going to see things like this. This is, you know, nothing fancy. It's just an extension. But you'll notice here it has some knurling on it. This is very handy because sometimes you just need to start a bolt, right? You need to start a bolt on something, and it's really slippery, this chrome. So I feel like better brand extensions and even sockets will have knurling on them so that you can turn it by hand to get things started or loosened. So just keep an eye out for that. On sockets and extensions, knurling is very nice, especially if your hands are greasy. All right, we're getting to the end here, and another cool socket here that I thought I'd show you. This is also a specialty socket. As you can see here, 3/8 drive. This is actually for a petcock for a radiator. I honestly don't use this because most of them are plastic and you can use a screwdriver or pliers, but I have it, so why not keep it? Now these ones, I guess, again, we're still on kind of funky looking sockets. So again, we flip it over. We have our box end, 3/8 and 1/2 inch. These are called universal joint or sockets, or I guess maybe even adapters, because what they do, right, we'll use the 3/8 here. So that goes on to the ratchet, and then this end you can put your extensions or your socket. And this is nice because, again, let's say you're working on something, a bolt that's offset, and you can't put your ratchet straight away. Now you can still work and have this, look at this, completely bent for the most part, and get to that tough to reach bolt. So yeah, those are universal joint extensions. Sometimes they reduce, but these ones are 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8, 3/8, and those help you get to those hard to reach places. All right, 2 or 3 more things here I want to mention. You might see these types of sockets, so they're not chrome, they're black, sometimes they're gray. These are called impact sockets. You can still see it says 13 here. There's, metric and standard, just like any other. But these are used, they're a little bit thicker and a little bit softer metal, but these are used on power tools or air tools and provide a lot more action. I'll put some examples of some impact guns that you might see these used on. You can still use these on your ratchet, no problem. It's just these are actually especially for power tools, because they can take a lot of force on them, whereas these, if you used it on a power tool, could shatter. And if this shatters, that does not feel great. So again, these are more robust toward impacting force of tools, but you can even, and I've done this a lot, put them on my sockets or ratchets and used it as a normal socket. So I guess that's really the difference between these two, is this is for power tools and pneumatic tools, whereas this one's only for your handheld ratchets. People still use it, and honestly, you do what you want, but just know that that's why there is that difference. These ones are a little bit more robust toward that extra force that power tools can put out. This is a socket driver, and that can be used to put, this one's specifically 1/4 inch drive, but obviously you can use adapters and whatnot to put on your 3/8 or 1/2 inch. This is nice too, because sometimes maybe you'll be wanting to tighten something straight on, and it's easier just to use something with a handle rather than a ratchet. So these are super nice. Again, I don't use them as much, but instead of buying unique nut drivers for like a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, whatever, I can just put on whatever socket I want to, take it off, put on a different size socket like this one, and use one tool for a lot of purposes. So there's that one. The last thing I wanted to mention, I'll move these out of the way, is the difference between a ratchet and a breaker bar. Now, I tried not to go too much in depth in this video, but ideas kept coming to me. So again, if you have comments or other thoughts, please put them below just to help other people out. But this just came to my mind. So obviously, ratchet, right? They can be moved back and forth without having to take it off the actual bolt. Whereas this, called a breaker bar, is just, basically the same thing, except it doesn't ratchet. And it gets its name from the actual, force that you put on these things. So again, you have your 3/8 inch drive, you put your 3/8 inch drive socket or your extensions or whatever, and then you can really just push down on these things. They're made to be basically used to break off very tight bolts or nuts. And we have another example. So we have a 3/8 or a 1/4 inch here, a 3/8, and then the big one that I love to use, this 1/2 inch one here, which has a nice comfort grip. But as you can see here, so we have this 1/2 inch one here, even compared to my 1/2 inch ratchet, right? I mean, look how much extra, I'm gonna keep them neck and neck. Look how much extra length I have, how much more leverage. That's almost 9 1/4 inches of extra leverage that this one tool would provide me. So that's really what these are used for, is, they're straight metal. They're not really too much to them, but they're made so that you can break away a nut and then use your ratchet to loosen the nut. Inside these, if you've seen some of my maintenance videos on ratchets, which you can check out here and see what the internals look like, there's mechanisms in here that they can take a good amount of force, but to break off a lug nut on a car, I would not use a 3/8 inch ratchet. I'd either use a really big 1/2 inch ratchet or honestly just my breaker bar, because that's all these things do, is they're used to just break nuts loose so you can get them off. So that's what I would recommend is, invest in one of these. It's really nice, especially the 1/2-inch drive, because really those are going to be the tightest bolts you'll really work with is the 1/2-inch drive. But that's what those are in case you see them. Obviously there's no ratcheting mechanism. They usually just have a rotating head so you can get to the bolt just by moving that. And that is it. That is everything that I think is helpful to know, at least from a beginner sense, about ratchets and sockets. These are one of my most favorite tools. I love collecting them, and beyond just their collectability, I would say, is they're just fun to work with. They're great assets to getting any job done. They're honestly kind of relaxing to listen to, and yeah, you can find pretty good deals at tool shops for them, or even yard sales. So definitely invest in some. If you have any questions or comments, suggestions are always welcome. I appreciate you watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks again.